to welcome everyone to tonight's Lobby Training 301 sequence. This lesson tonight is going to be focusing on practicing for your lobby meeting. And what we're focused on tonight is understanding the planning process behind our meeting preparations with members of Congress and their staff, is really helping demonstrate a respect-based relational meeting, what that sounds like, what that looks like, as well as really helping understand why we take this approach. We're also hopeful that by the end, you're going to be able to prepare for your own meetings and feel confidence in knowing where to go for tools, support, and preparation heading into DC. So without further ado, Amy, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
I could just introduce myself as the Director of Congressional Liaisons and Lobby Days. I have been with the organization almost since the beginning, back in 2008. The organization was formed in 2007, and I am in North San Diego County.
Thank you, Amy. Amy's the magician that makes the whole lobby day tick. So if you have any sense of wonder about how she does it, tonight's the night to ask her the magic kind of behind what you see is going to happen in coordinating over 500 meetings with 1,200 participants here in just a little bit, all while being able to spin many other plates too. So tonight's agenda is pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is really start with reviewing the roles that we talked about briefly last week on Lobbying 201. We're actually going to jump right in from there into a mock lobby meeting and show you live time what that looks like. We're going to then have a sectional breakdown. We'll review key takeaways as we go through the meeting so we can kind of process it and press the pause button for an instant replay in live time. We'll then have some robust Q&A discussion, followed by a discussion on our supporting asks with advice from our DC office. And then after that, we'll review what we're going to ask for in our meeting practice for partner groups. We're going to be asking everyone to put this into practice tonight. So for the first 30 minutes, what I encourage everyone to do is actually take notes for anything that stands out to you in what we're going to role model for our own lobby meeting so that you can put that into practice yourself. We're going to try to capture a lot of that with some of the text on the slides, but in the actual role play, we won't have slides up. And what I'll also say is this: CCL has really been recognized by congressional offices time and again, year in, year out on the Hill for how impressed they were with our advocates coming prepared, practiced, and knowing our stuff. And it's a tradition that I know that we're looking forward to upholding this year as well, thanks to all of your participation tonight. So thank you for helping us build these critical relationships. And to get started, what I'll do is pass it to you, Amy, to review a couple of key concepts.
Thanks, Brett. Well, our goal is relationship building and moving your member up the ladder of support for carbon fee and dividend.
What Amy is sharing here is that, as we've shared in our Climate Advocate Training Program, we're all about finding common ground. We do that through three main places: shared values, shared social connections in the places that we cared for. And then we're also really focused on our number one rule, which is simply to treat everyone, those that disagree with us, with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. And we did that in the Climate Advocate Training story through the story of Representative Mia Love and her evolution with our CCL constituents, now her leadership in the Climate Solutions Caucus, as well as highlighting even the importance of climate action with her constituents. So I'll pass it back to you, Amy, and we'll jump into roles.
Well, let's get into the nuts and bolts of lobby team roles then. To begin with, the central role for each of our meetings with members of Congress is the leader. That's a lobby team leader who empowers everyone to share and participate, especially the constituents. We want to give them a voice, and we want so that we can build the capacity for this work. The lead may also facilitate transitions in the agenda. If the leader's not the liaison, the leader is responsible for briefing the liaison after the meeting, and the leader assigns roles before a meeting. So an analogy that we find useful here is that of a conductor. The team leader is there to manage the meeting, not to dominate the meeting. The leader's not necessarily the one who talks the most at all, but the leader's the one who empowers everyone to share and participate, especially the constituents, as I said. The leader may choose to be in charge of handling the transitions between different parts of a meeting. They might help keep the conversation on track and help wrap things up. And the leader will help the team settle on an appropriate supporting ask for the meeting and make sure that everyone's on the same page with that. Back to you, Brett.
So we already reviewed the rest of these roles here in Lobbying 201, but just as a quick review for tonight, just so that we can be on the same page in case you didn't get to that webinar, depending on the size of your lobby team, an individual like yourself on these meetings is going to probably have to fill multiple roles. Everyone is encouraged to participate in the discussion, but really to give preference to the constituents if possible. So here's a quick review of some of those roles. The appreciator you can see up top, that's the person basically that starts the meeting by showing appreciation for something the member of Congress has recently accomplished. It can be successfully done where everyone in the meeting even kind of shares an appreciation that's authentic as they go through their introduction about who they are too. The timekeeper, that's a person that essentially asks how much time we have at the beginning and then signals throughout when we're getting close, or especially at the end when we're having just a few minutes remaining. The note taker is one that essentially throughout the process takes notes. If possible, the note taker should be an experienced volunteer. This person should be able to follow the thread of the conversation and specifically capturing what's said by the member of Congress on that same day. So everyone's encouraged to participate in the discussion, especially constituents. The main person to deliver the ask, though, is the asker, and that lobby team member is that who presents CCL's purpose and ask, and if possible, that should be a constituent and also someone that has a strong grasp of our policies so they can be confident. And we'll get into that here at the very end. The asker also leaves behind the one-page ask at the very end. The deliverer is also a role. You can bring a lot of constituent postcards or letters or endorsement letters from community leaders to the meeting. The deliverer is the one that brings those and makes sure to introduce them and that the member or the staff member can take time to read through them to see the impact. The follow-up is somebody, preferably again a constituent or the leader, that's going to make sure to be assigned to do the follow-up. If that person isn't the liaison or the meeting lead, then they need to coordinate with them afterwards so that we can make sure that no balls were dropped and that that person really does within a day or two actually follow through. And a couple of the other ones that are relatively new. Oftentimes in early meetings, we forgot we were so busy, bustling between offices in Capitol Hill to slow down and take a picture with the actual meeting. So we'd love to get a picture captured with whoever you're meeting with and then share that online with afterwards. And then here's another great role that I think is something that all of you, we'd love to invite you to really listen in on with tonight, and that is the observer. And this is really any team member that's designated to put aside their agenda for what they're hoping the outcomes or the goals are for this meeting, and just listen for any underlying needs that aren't being expressed by the staff member or the actual member. If they hear something that feels like it's missing or sounds out of place, or that they pick up on body language, you name it, that's their role to really ask and bring it up and find the opportunity to clarify what might need some further discussion. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Amy, and we'll jump right into our meeting. I know that was a whirlwind, and we have a lot more on 201 if you want to get in depth about those meeting roles. But for the time being, we'll transition tonight.
All right. Well, and now a meeting. A meeting outline is pretty simple. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. At the beginning of the meeting, you want to thank the member or the staffers for their time. Find out how much time they have. Introduce yourselves, show appreciation, state our purpose and deliver those constituent communications, and present our ask. The middle is the heart of the meeting, and that includes the discussion, the active listening, heavy on the observing, hearing their concerns, listening for their values, finding common ground, trying to overcome any obstacles, executing your strategy to move them forward.
So getting to that end part then, the end of the meeting really is circling back around, and if you haven't already kind of gotten clarity on the ask, making sure to follow up with supporting asks, and then to make sure to ask some of these follow-up questions, including, what can we be doing to gain your support in district, who should we be talking to, and confirm any follow-up items for the office. So let's just quickly talk about afterwards. Post-meeting, what you want to do is immediately re-huddle together as a team, not only outside of the actual office in case the member goes out and has taken on votes, but maybe a little bit further down the hallway, and have a chance to really check each other's notes. Did you all have the same read on the main ask and their reaction? Did you all have the same read on how the member felt about their stance right now on the importance of climate with the priority with the office? You also, in that meeting debrief, want to make sure to confirm who's going to do the follow-up and also have a thank you card that your team has ready to drop off again and everyone's signed. So with that, I'll pass it to you, Amy, and I think we're going to jump right into an actual meeting demonstration.
Right, right. And I'll narrate the demonstration, and we'll stop at certain points to debrief what just happened. And I'll play the meeting leader, who also happens to be a constituent of, we're going to say, Congressman Doyle. And Brett is going to play the role of Congressman Doyle. So what we'll do is we'll go through the beginning, the middle, and the end for an initial meeting with a member of Congress. Our meetings with a fictitious Congressman Doyle from Kansas, 1st District. Our agenda is broad because it's our first meeting. We want to establish trust, we want to show respect and appreciation, and kind of feel each other out. So the meeting is part of a long-term relationship, not just a one-time event. So of course we want to advise them on our policy and tell them what we're doing to create political will for them, but we also need to be prepared to do a lot of listening so we'll know how to move that member forward in future meetings. As a last note, as we go through the meeting, see if you can identify all of those different roles that we're taking on here. Even if I'm only one CCL volunteer, I'm going to be playing the part of all the different roles we discussed earlier. We found that it's most useful to think about which roles you'd most like to take on for your own meeting as you listen to tonight's meeting. So here we go with the start of the meeting. Well, first, Congressman Doyle, we want to acknowledge how busy you are and how appreciative we are that you were able to carve out some time for us today.
Well, it's absolutely great to see constituents come all the way across to DC here and engage in the political process. I know you had to come halfway across the country to meet me, so pleasure's mine.
Well, thank you, Congressman. We know it's a busy day for you, so how much time do you have for this meeting today?
I have a committee meeting in about 20 minutes, so that means I can meet for 15 with you. You'd think that they would have given me an office right next to my actual committee meeting room, but I'm stuck over here in Rayburn, and the committee meets in Longworth. I guess that's how government works.
You all do a lot of walking in DC. Well, my name is Amy Bennett, and I'm a constituent of yours living in Lawrence, Kansas, and I'm a school teacher. I'm here today because I'm worried about the kind of world the kids I teach will grow up in. And I want to do my part and make it as safe as possible for them.
Well, Amy, you know that I served for 16 years in the Kansas legislature before coming here to Congress, fighting for school children and for seniors. And I believe that government should exercise its powers to look after our most vulnerable citizens. I admire you for devoting your life to educate our kids, and I know it must be especially difficult right now for you with this federal government trying to continue to evaluate how they relate to local schools.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Congressman. We'd like to start by telling you how much we admire your work to protect seniors from identity theft scams. I have an older parent myself, and your work means I have one less thing to worry about as she ages.
Thanks for recognizing that. It's important to me, as you probably know, that all Kansans actually work and actually have their looking out for with retirement comfortably.
That's fantastic. Since we have just a few minutes, let me briefly tell you while we're here, and then we'd like to hear your thoughts on our policy. Our purpose is to create the political will for a livable world. Back home in Lawrence, we're working to create the political space we know you'll need to support our policy. Over the past couple of months, we've gathered letters and postcards from your constituents and endorsements from community leaders in Lawrence. Here's a stack of 120 letters from your constituents and an endorsement of our policy, the carbon fee and dividend. And this is from the Lawrence Regional Medical Center. So our ask is for you to introduce legislation that puts a fee on fossil fuels and returns the net revenue to American households. Although seeing how this is our first meeting with you, how about if we start hearing your thoughts on climate and energy policy? So, okay, let's pause the meeting right here and debrief that beginning. So we started by thanking him for the meeting. We asked how much time we had. We introduced ourselves. We showed appreciation and delivered our purpose, our letters and endorsements and postcards, and then we presented our ask. Notice how quick that was. Every meeting is different, so you just adapt to the situation. But that part needs to go fairly quickly so you can get into the discussion. For example, this may be your 10th meeting, so a formal introduction might not seem necessary. Or maybe the member says they only have 10 minutes, then you've got to cut some of this stuff out. So we're demonstrating a suggested outline, but once the conversation starts, you begin to kind of get a read for the room and demonstrate being adaptive. Being adaptive is the ability to perceive and understand what's happening in that moment and being able to react to challenges as they happen. Being adaptive means you're not only listening to the words being said, but also the tone of voice and the body language. So we need to remain flexible and practice good listening. One thing we didn't do was take the bait and go off topic. Congressman Doyle has some strong thoughts on the federal government's role in local education. So that's a reminder to stay on topic because for this meeting we only have 15 minutes. We talk more about this in Lobbying 401. Also note that the ask is direct, it's clear, and it's specific. Our primary ask will always be the same, so it's just not worth it to test the waters here. The worst possible outcome is you leave and they have no idea why you were there. So be sure you get that ask in early. So get that primary ask in, and note how concisely I checked in with the office about the fee and dividend. Even if it's your 10th meeting with the office, refreshing them with 2 sentences about these policy details is suggested to avoid any potential confusion. Remember, they can have 12 meetings in a day, and trying to remember carbon fee and dividend, just a 2-sentence refresher will save you a lot of confusion. So let's resume our meeting. So now we're in the middle section. We'll resume with the Congressman's response to my question.
You had asked me immediately before the break about my thoughts on energy and climate policy. Well, I can't say that I hear much about the need to do something about the climate or global warming. I know that the general mood is, in Kansas, not too interested in it. We have a strong wind sector, but the wind industry needs to begin competing on their own without the need for subsidies or tax credits. And that's why I supported the gradual elimination of the production tax credit for wind. So when it comes to energy policy, Amy, I guess you could put me in the all of the above energy category. Regardless of climate change or this so-called warming, we need American energy independence. And we need to stop propping up one energy at the expense of the other industries. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-environment. I mean, I've been portrayed as anti-environment, but we need to get this economy going. And these regulations are the things that are choking out small business. The people of Kansas send me here with a clear message. Stop the federal government's overreach.
So what I'm hearing you say is that both the economy and the environment are important to you, not one or the other. Is that a fair assessment?
Sure. I mean, a lot of negative things are said about me because I'm putting jobs first, but the environmental agenda alone is not good for business.
Well, we can certainly appreciate being unfairly labeled. I mean, we're often portrayed as being anti-business, but nothing could be further from the truth. We, like you, want the economy and the environment to flourish. Have you been briefed on our carbon fee and dividend proposal?
I know my aide, Amy, has told me about it in detail, but why don't you all tell me about it right here since we're gathered right now?
Okay. Well, what we're proposing is this, and then we go on to explain carbon fee and dividend. And this is an important point that we explain this to the congressman at this point. And so rather than say that again, I'm just going to go on. How does that sound to you compared to the regulations by the previous administration?
Well, let me be clear, Amy. Regulation kills jobs here in Kansas, and for what? We impose additional costs on Americans, and I don't see how these rules are going to stop global warming. But I do understand one thing. Increasing costs isn't good for business or consumers.
When I first became concerned about the climate, I struggled with that as well. Could I tell you what I found out about the dividend aspect of our proposal that put me at ease?
Sure. Put me at ease too.
Well, knowing your economic background, I think you'll appreciate what we've learned. What's really interesting about our policy is that by returning the net proceeds to household, the dividend will have a stimulative effect on job creation and the economy. Job creation occurs when people get a dividend check every month and then they spend it. You know as well as anyone that 70% of American economy is tied to consumer spending, and healthcare is a large slice of that. So employers like Lawrence Regional and Children's Hospital stand to benefit from people having more money in their pocket to spend. So let's pause again and recap that middle part. So notice that what we didn't do here, we didn't correct him or take him to task for his position on climate or any other statements. It's obviously that we see things differently, but why start with something that will put us into a situation where one of us has to be right and the other person has to be wrong? That doesn't get you anywhere. So instead, doesn't it make more sense to listen and ask additional questions that we can start to find common ground and build the relationship from there? Notice how many questions were asked. What they're trying to do is to draw out more information so we can discover where we have that common ground and also discover any misconceptions that the Congress member has. Also notice how we asked for permission to proceed. How would you like to take a look at that now? Would you like to hear what we found? Those kinds of things, asking permission. I'm trying to find common ground so that we can find a way to forward that works for this Congress member. So it's clear that he doesn't want to hold the same belief that we do in regards to global warming. We can tell by his quote so-called global warming statement. He's already revealed to us how he feels, so I moved on to find that common ground. It's evident from the responses to my explanation about a carbon fee and dividend and my question that he's fixed on costs, not the dividend. But then I explained how the dividend will benefit local hospitals. So again, I didn't put him into a situation where he's the loser for not listening or for not understanding, but rather restating his statements to enable him to open up and listen further. Keep in mind, this may not be a meeting where we can try to change his mind, but rather focusing on developing some trust and showing our good listening skills. So each meeting is unique, and after your first meeting with the office, you'll often have a specific agenda or points to cover from previous meetings. But don't be afraid to say, you know what? That's an important issue you raise, and I'd like to gather some more information for you. Can we talk about what a transition to a clean energy economy would look like with carbon fee and dividend in our next meeting? So that opens the door for another meeting. So let's demonstrate how to wrap up a meeting. The meeting can draw to an end in a couple of ways. Either the timekeeper notices that we've got 5 minutes left and we're near the end of our time, or we begin to pick up visual or body language clues signaling that, maybe we're needing to end this meeting. Something like someone glancing at their watch or a staffer closing their notebook is a pretty good sign. When either of these things happen, maybe you have 5 minutes left or you're noticing the cues, then it's time to wrap things up. Don't try to squeeze in more discussion. There's going to be another meeting, and part of our follow-up will include asking whether they would be open to another meeting. We could ask, could we ask that in our next meeting and discuss more about your concerns of carbon fee and dividend or and the effect on small business and regulations? We have several studies we'd like to share that you might find valuable. Would you be interested in how the fee and dividend affects your districts and the income by income quintile? In this way, we start to show that we can be a resource to the office by bringing data at a future date. So let's finish up our meeting scenario. Congressman, I see that we're nearing the end of our time with you, so I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to introduce a bill that puts a fee on carbon and returns the net proceeds to American households.
Well, I do appreciate you asking, Amy, and I think it's a novel approach you have, but I have some reservations. And besides yourself, this is not a topic that's really important to my constituents.
I understand. This is our first meeting after all. We promised to go home and continue working on grassroots support so that when we meet again, we'll have more letters and more endorsements for you. Would you be willing to sit down with your staff and review our proposal and get back to us with what exactly is preventing you from introducing our policy?
I'll definitely do that. And then if you ask me, it seems like I got the easier task. If you're going to speak with folks back home, then I may actually recommend that you meet with Mayor Rawlings. Being a former utility CEO, he's somebody I listen to regarding energy issues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that recommendation. Like we said earlier, we're trying to make it easier for you to support our policy. So we'll make an appointment to see the mayor. I'm going to leave this one-page ask with you. And how would you like me to follow up with additional materials in the future?
You can follow up with Joanna through email.
Congressman, one more last thing before we leave. Would you mind telling us with whom you enjoy working with on the other side of the aisle?
Well, as you know, I'm new here and there's a lot of ill feelings around, but I've had the opportunity to work with a couple of Democrats on the other side of the aisle.
Well, that must be frustrating, but is there one that you've gotten to know?
Well, Congressman Nolan from Minnesota sat next to each other in the plane the other day, and he's not as bad as he seems on TV.
Okay, well, that's the end of our demonstration for an initial meeting. So let's switch gears to discuss the final considerations and then take some time for questions. For many of you on the line, this might be your first meeting. As a result, you might feel someone like a little nervous or unqualified. And this is really important to acknowledge. Your first one's hard, but as you move through, because it's really important because your voice matters. In order to help alleviate these feelings, just keep in mind important meeting element. Keep in mind one other important meeting element that's in play. We're in the relationship business. That's one of our strengths. So never underestimate the power of injecting your own personality and fun into a staffer or a meeting with a member of Congress. Say you find out the staffer grew up on a cattle ranch. Go ahead and ask if he knows how to wrangle cattle. If your member of Congress went to a rival school, bring it up in a jovial way. Another thing you should do is ask them about the pictures or displays in the office. These are things they're proud of. Now, if this is your first meeting with a staffer, ask them to introduce themselves at the beginning of the meeting. These personal and playful moments will help build a stronger relationship and make the whole meeting more fun for everybody.
Absolutely. But just as a quick review from 201, for our primary ask, what we're really asking again is for them to introduce a bill that puts a steadily rising fee on carbon-based fuels and returns all of the money back to American households. And really the most important element of our lobby meetings is that primary ask. What we do is we ask Republicans to introduce fee and dividend and Democrats to support existing revenue neutral carbon tax bills or introduce it with a Republican co-sponsor. So given the political reality of DC today, we want our bill right now submitted only if it has a Republican on it as somebody that initiates it and asks Democrats to co-sponsor. When you make that ask, swing for the fences. Don't negotiate with yourself as you're saying it. Negotiate with them after you ask for it, but be confident. And don't deliver a supporting ask until that primary one's been made. I always like really, even if you've already asked it, you can bring it up in a chiding way. Even we've been here before, but what our primary ask always is, and then deliver it. And then you can immediately go from there. But at least they're checking in, you're reminding them, as Amy said. And if possible, you know exactly why you've been rejected, or they'll bring up why they still are hesitating to support it. If you can determine exactly that through a conversation and really get to those listening questions after that, that's even more critical. And then let's get into having supporting asks ready to go, because that's really critical as this view of smaller steps forward, moving them up the ladder of climate advocacy with specific and actionable asks that you can actually really engage your member with. So I'll pass it to you, Amy, on that one.
Great. And this is something that you plan out ahead. So what is a supporting ask? Well, many members of Congress aren't ready yet to introduce or support a revenue neutral carbon fee. But getting legislation passed is a complicated process, and there's a lot of smaller things to happen before we'll get that law. So every member of Congress may be willing to do one of these smaller things. Supporting asks are very specific asks that start to check off those smaller things. Thus, they build support towards our main ask. We're getting them to do things they can say yes to. So when crafting a supporting ask, remember to make it as specific and as actionable as possible. For example, don't ask them to support climate. Ask them to talk about the importance of acting on climate on the campaign trail. See the difference? You want asks that you can check back on. Ben Pendergrass, one of CCL's Senior District Directors of Governmental Affairs, reminds us.
For many of you, you've probably already made an ask revolving around our proposal carbon fee and dividend. And you've reached a point where there's no new information on that you really are providing to the office. And one thing that is really important from Hill staff perspective is time is valuable, and they don't want to have the same conversations over and over again. Now, mind you, our goal is always to move offices in the direction of a robust price on carbon. Some offices just aren't going to be that place yet. And in order to preserve and nurture the relationship with offices, we have to bring them something new. And this a lot of time is in the form of a secondary ask. Right now, there are 14 bills that are being promoted by the Climate Solutions Caucus that the co-chairs have identified as being bipartisan and have a beneficial impact on climate. And that's a good place to start when you're looking for a secondary ask, because there are lots of things that Republican offices in particular are interested in working on that are climate related that aren't necessarily a price on carbon. For instance, grid resilience, specific kinds of greenhouse gas emissions like hydrofluorocarbons, emerging technologies, energy storage. All these things are important components to fixing the climate problem, and we can take them in littler chunks, kind of baby steps towards the big asks and big bills that are necessary to really fix the problem. And so you should really think about focusing on one of these secondary asks when you're in the office. Other things that are really important is if you can bring it to the district level. If you can show the impacts climate are having in the district, bring new information to the office. Or it could also be projects and industries in the district that are in this space. We know some districts, there's big wind projects coming online, there's big solar projects. Making sure congressional offices are aware of these are really important, so they see that we are building a future that can have a smaller carbon footprint. Another really important aspect to moving past when you've already talked about carbon fee and dividend a lot, offices care about who supports policies. Right now, there are many companies that have endorsed a price on carbon. They have not gotten into specifics because there's no bill that's moving right now, but a lot of offices probably aren't fully aware of those companies that have endorsed this idea, and bringing those endorsements to offices is always highly valuable, and especially if you can identify businesses in district that are calling for action on climate that the member or senator might not be aware of, can be hugely influential. And one of the most important things is working with an office and moving forward is we want to be helpful. It's really important to listen to what that particular office is interested in working on. This could be largely determined by what committee they sit on. If they're on the transportation committee, it could be something transportation related. If they're on natural resources. It could be something regarding public lands and preserving natural carbon sinks, reforestation, things like that. A lot of what drives them is based on what committees they are actively doing work on. And of course, the second thing is what is of interest to the district. Obviously, things always relate back to the district or state. And if you can find out if your state or district has a lot of wind power, that's a good place to start a conversation. Like, what more can we be doing? What are you working on? What's your focus? What's your interest? Important to talk about with these offices besides carbon fee and dividend. And I know that is always our primary ask.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much. Hard to keep up with you there. That's a lot of information again. And really, just as a demonstration, we actually have a specific supporting ask sheet, and it'll be given out at the conference as well. So here's kind of a supporting ask sheet that I'm also putting in the chat window. And essentially what that is recommendations from DC about asks that we can ask both offices or ones that are just on the left or the right side of the aisle. So for example, if your office is either a Democrat or a Republican office, you can ask them to co-write a joint op-ed with you or co-sponsor any of the Climate Solutions Caucus bills. Or, for example, this new House resolution that was introduced by Representative Curbelo and several others, recognizing the impacts of climate change on outdoor recreation and the winter industry. If it's a conservative office, you could ask them to talk to either Representative Ryan or Senator Hatch about holding a hearing this summer with conservative economists talking about the benefits to the economy of a revenue-neutral carbon tax. If it's a more liberal office, you can ask them about really being able to, being interested in committing to revenue neutrality and sharing this priority with a Republican colleague. There's plenty on both sides of the aisle. This is just a sampling of these supporting asks. And so we just wanted to emphasize some ideas that can really help deepen that meeting conversation. And again, the key is to drop one of these and then just take notes and have a discussion about it. Don't feel like you have to pepper them with 14 supporting asks. The best meetings I've been in have really focused on really maybe 2, 3 at most, really depending on the meeting time. So I'll pass it back to you, Amy, here to review a couple last things, and we'll jump into our practice.
Thanks, Brett. I think your point about asking questions is really key to return back to that observer role. I think it's extremely important to give plenty of listening space and focus on the member and the staffer and help them feel heard and really learn. CCL's development director, Lene Pettengill, told me a story about a meeting she had with a quiet staffer. Lene said, she appeared to have a question or concern, but she wasn't asking it. One of our team members was getting ready to give more information. After all, the staffer wasn't saying anything. However, the team leader, practicing awareness, picked up on the subtle body language and asked the staffer if she might have a question about what had been shared so far. And she did. And when we gave her the space to go back and get the clarification she needed about our proposal, then her body language really shifted. You could tell she was ready to hear more. I think this is the most difficult aspect of a staffer or a member meeting. We have so much valuable information to share, and we're so passionate about addressing the climate crisis. However, we're likely to be much more effective if we share only what the staffer most wants or needs to hear. That way we're meeting with them where they are, not where we think they should be or where we want them to be.
It's actually kind of flustering at times when you're realizing that if you're going at a pace that isn't able to be kept up with, to realize that you need to slow down. And so really being intentional ahead of time and actually having a couple of prepared questions to help get them back into the conversation is really key. And again, just the whole time remembering that this is a give and take, trial and error human relationship. You're going to do great, and really emphasize that relational development that you're building, and realize that maybe not all of the goals of the meeting are going to get ticked off, but you prioritize the first ones first and run through them in a really adaptive way that Amy's mentioned. So I'll pass it to you, Amy, here on the importance of practice, and then we'll review our mock lobby meeting.
Great. One final point on the importance of practice, and there's many advantages it helps us with. It builds our reputation. It demonstrates respect. It develops trust in the team. It impresses others. It allows you to be present and adaptive at the same time. We practice ahead of time, but you never know what scenarios will play out. That's why we always need to be focused on what's being said in the moment and respond to what we're hearing, not what we expect or not what we think we heard. Remaining flexible and practicing good listening is really key.
You can also contact either of us. Amy is at amy@citizensclimate.org. I'm at brett@citizensclimate.org. We'd really love to make sure to have a chance to have your opinion shared and get your feedback on anything else that you'd still like to learn that we didn't cover tonight that you're hoping to really have highlighted. And what I'll also do here is just quickly review what we're going to talk about in your own meeting. So with that, let's talk about some key suggestions. So basically, on a final note, there's 6 things that we've encouraged you to remember based on what we discussed tonight. First, you want to make sure to introduce and connect as a fellow constituent of wherever you're at. Ask them to say a little bit more about themselves, and with that then leads to the next point. As they introduce themselves, as you've done your research, seek out those common ground values that you can build off of, that you can demonstrate throughout the meeting, that you're on the same team with as this priority for their district. As you make your primary ask, also feel free to use your own words. Connect it to what you think your members' concerns might be. For example, as Congressman Doyle, I was concerned about regulations and small business. So connecting, for example, on how fee and dividend would empower Main Street's economies to get going, and the predictable nature of what would happen with the price signal would really help you connect. You name it. There's a lot of ways that you can humanize and personalize fee and dividend to whatever scenario you're practicing for. You also want to make sure to build in practice in asking questions to draw up more information, as we've done tonight and demonstrated that, and really to find out what they do and don't understand about our policy. So you don't just assume you kind of went in there and won them over without getting some actual feedback. As you advance into really addressing your concerns, make sure to also practice asking permission to proceed. That way you're kind of continuing to clarify what actually is relevant for them. And then at the meeting end, it's always helpful to ask what we could be doing more of, really be able to have their support for our policy and how they want us to follow up for them. Is a key way to make sure that we're also closing the deal, we're closing that loop afterwards. And for each role, you're going to be paired essentially with somebody else, and everyone hopefully has done a little bit of research on which congressman or which congresswoman they're hoping their partner can play. It's going to be awkward at first. Just take a moment to introduce yourselves and really be able to embody that character as best you can. It's going to feel goofy, but feel free to really raise your hand, even ask questions once you get to the breakout rooms. We'll be able to kind of float between them and field questions, if you will. But for now, we really, really appreciate everyone's feedback and taking the time to be engaged tonight in this webinar. We hope you found it useful. Please feel free to reach out to us with any other comments or questions. And from there, we'll see you soon, whether it's in DC or another time soon, hopefully. Thank you, everyone.